All right, let's get back to it, you guys. Welcome back to the channel. More on the Epstein files. We're going to cover Ukrainian Biolabs. We're also going to cover a plan that Epstein had to basically create nameless children, as well as Bohemian Grove. And Epstein was satanically mocking the gospel. So we're going to get into all that today. We're going to start with the Biolabs. Welcome back to the channel. Now, remember when we did all those videos on the Ukraine Biolabs, and we said that all the presidents knew about them, starting with Obama? But of course, the fact checkers came out and said there was no evidence to support secret biolabs in Ukraine. Because remember, this was one of the reasons that Putin gave as to why he invaded Ukraine. He said there were these biolabs that the United States was setting up to create chemical weapons and do other secret experiments. And everyone who covered the biolabs had their videos flagged and removed for disinformation. Remember all that? Well, if you hadn't figured it out by now, our elected officials lie straight to our faces. They've been doing it. The Epstein files, Trump lied straight to our faces several times. Pam Bondi, all of them, they just lie. So, are we supposed to believe them when they tell us something? Well, no. There were, in fact, Ukrainian biolabs working on unspeakable horrors, because I found them in the Epstein files. Now, let's get started on this, because our entire discussion today with these biolabs will center around this individual. And his name is Brian Bishop. Let's make this a little bit smaller so you can see this. Brian Bishop. And they had the gall to actually publish some of this stuff on this MIT Technology Review. This guy on the left is Brian Bishop, and he is a real-life Dr. Bishop out of the Fringe TV series. Now, what was he working on? Well, creepy DNA experiments, likely related to cloning. It was very secretive. They didn't want to leave a paper trail. Obviously, if you're doing something legal, you shouldn't care about who sees it, right? But something else was going on here. Now, let's take a look. Epstein asks Brian Bishop for a briefing from a secret Ukrainian lab. Let's take a look, you guys. Jeffrey Epstein to Brian Bishop, designer babies. Now, parts of this story have been covered, but we found other email threads that seem to expand on this. Let's go back to the beginning of this post here. And Brian says, let's make sure we're at the beginning here. Brian says, attached is the doc you requested. It's the use of funds spreadsheet for the designer baby and human cloning company. This gets us out of our self-funded garage biology phase to the first live birth of a human designer baby and possibly a human clone within 5 years. Once we reach the first birth, everything changes and the world will never be the same again, much less the future of the human species. Attached doc shows 1.7, I think that's probably billion per year or million per year for up to 5 years, and 1 million for lab setup. Next steps. I'm happy to hop on another call, or I could take a trip to meet you in person. If you have any thoughts about what I might be missing or whether this is a reasonable estimate to get to the first live birth, then I would really appreciate the feedback that you have. This guy was traveling in Lithuania. Brian Bishop. Jeffrey Epstein says, no rush. Let's go to the next one. Again, these two are talking from Brian Bishop to Jeffrey Epstein. And here's where they talk about not publicly acknowledging the birth of these children, which to me is just insane. He writes to Jeffrey, here's a deck about my designer baby project. I've talked with Austin again, and we have a series of questions about how serious you are about wanting this and what the ground rules are for me even exploring this with you and getting to next steps. Most of these questions are around your requirements for secrecy and privacy, specifically regarding reputational risk and also any financial involvement. I think there would also need to be some understanding about goals and feasibility of different results. I think that one way this could be done is under the banner of My Designer Babies project. Since the other deliverable is similar and shares so many of the same procedures and lab requirements. So they're trying to nest one experiment inside of another, a secret experiment. And then Brian says to Jeffrey, this might offer a sufficient level of deniability. I propose another call on Monday in the afternoon to discuss these issues. Brian, now let's see what else happened here. Epstein says, I'm traveling in the Mideast until the 1st. Let's do it after that. Now, this was in 2018. He says, I have no issue with investing. The problem is only if I am seen to lead. So he wants his name erased from this. Brian then says, how about Wednesday? Sounds like you could be the first investor as long as absolute anonymity is kept. I have always envisioned there would be anonymity requirements about babies. We can't publicly identify who these are or their parents or benefactors. It would brand the child as essentially and sadly a freak for life in the media. So I'd always assume the investor would need absolute anonymity for these kinds of products. They call the children products. So the financial structure needs to be designed with these details in mind. Let's discuss these issues in early August when you get back. Austin has been advising me on this, and it's an open question whether he will be involved in designer babies in terms of his personal interest. So, what else was going on? So, there's all kinds of things wrong with this. All kinds of things. Then we get to this message here from Brian Bishop to Jeffrey Epstein. And let's go down to here. Epstein says to Bishop, I like implant embryo, wait 9 months. Great ending. Bishop then says to Epstein, proceeding with more mouse testing at my Ukraine lab. And then we get something else. Amateur in Mississippi has been testing human sperm modification. Just fluorescent tagging so far. Doesn't work for my purposes yet. It's some freakish Tuskegee-like experiment. Tagging sperm with fluorescence. Sounds almost like luciferase. Then, let's see. Brian Bishop replies, all right, from the Department of Crazy Plant Stuff, fusion of bull and human sperm with Nicotiana protoplasts. Why are they fusing bulls and human sperm? Agrobacterium is what causes these tree warts. Biohackers wander around in forests, harvest these, use for DIY at home gene transfer to plants. I will assemble and send you specific reference for my my genetic editing projects. So, like the days of Noah, possibly, genetic experiments creating all kinds of abominations, unnatural creation. Now, you'll remember our previous discussions about the Epstein files and about Epstein, and he liked places with little regulation. He liked places that were fully corrupted and controllable, countries where he could easily manipulate his experiments. We saw this in previous emails. He talked about that he loved doing experiments in Africa because there was no regulation. Remember that in the board meeting in the Virgin Islands when he was trying to get his data center essentially started in the Virgin Islands on St. Thomas? And then he also mentioned the same advantages of under regulation with regards to the island of St. Thomas itself, that he could kind of do what he wanted. Well, now we can add Ukraine. And that was the only Biolab Ukraine email that I could find in all the Epstein files, but it's pretty cryptic that this guy was doing these secret mice experiments in the Ukraine. Why the Ukraine? So there's probably a whole network of labs. So we can now officially call Epstein Dr. Frankenstein. Except instead of using body parts to create his monster, he was using genetic pieces, fusing man with animal, like the days of Noah. The curious Dr. Bishop. Now let's read this because they come right out in the open and talk about the public part of his experiments, the designer babies. But remember, we read in the files that they were going to try to nest a secret project within this one. Unbelievable. So this says the DIY designer baby project funded with Bitcoin. This is how they get around this. Remember, Epstein was talking about other currencies way back before Bitcoin was ever a thing. He was talking about other currencies. I know other channels are saying that Epstein possibly invented Bitcoin. It's possible. I haven't seen those videos, but I've heard chatter. And so this is how they get around all this stuff. They create the currency that cannot be tracked, but eventually this will all segue into the digital currency, which will be tracked. But they had to do Bitcoin first. So here's an article about the creepy Dr. Bishop. It says at his keyboard in Austin, Texas, Brian Bishop was writing quickly, nationally ranked speed typist. He has drafted a polite inquiry to prominent futurists in the UK. He wanted advice on his designer baby startup. For a few years now, Bishop 29, a 29-year-old programmer and a Bitcoin investor, has been leaving a trail of comments about human enhancement on the web. This is where you get into eugenics, right? Because even this Dr. Bishop and Epstein were talking about how this would change the world forever. Superhumans, X-Men, editing genes for the best possible outcome and taking God's chance completely out of the equation, or God's direction in who's born and when and all these things. They're literally trying to be gods on earth. Now, let's keep reading this article. It says he's a transhumanist, which means he thinks humans can be improved in profound ways by technology. He'd long exhorted others to do something about the human condition, and now he's decided to do it himself. According to the email sent in May, Bishop and his partner in the enterprise, Max Berry, a former biotech company lab scientist, was starting a company focused on the production of designer babies and human germline genetic engineering. He noted that the lab work has started, and we have an initial parent couple customer. He said he wanted ethics advice to help with the endorsement of prominent geneticists, George Church of Harvard University, whose tally of potential genetic enhancements, a scroll of genes with names like PCSK9 and CCR5, presented in dozens of talks, has been called the wish list for post-human era. Bishop's hope is to make these possibilities real. A copy of his business proposal says his venture plans to let parents have transgenic children who can grow muscle without weightlifting, who possess genes from long-lived supercentenarians. Those would be people that live over 100, or who are endowed with the AB plus blood type, meaning they could receive a transfusion from anyone. In November, a Chinese biophysicist claimed he'd made the first gene-edited babies, news that sparked a global outcry and could lead to stiff penalties in China for the scientists responsible. Since Jianku's undertaking was first revealed by MIT Technology Review, science leaders have raced to stop the next rogue researcher. Some want a strict moratorium on gene-modified babies. Others say that what's needed are detailed technical criteria and medical guidelines, so IVF embryos can be modified safely and for purposes the medical community agrees on. Now, hold the horses. In vitro fertilization. Do you think that Trump's push to federally fund in vitro fertilization has nothing to do with Epstein? Of course it does. Of course it does. You can't do gene editing without IVF. The two go hand in hand. You edit the genes and then you select the outcome. Gene editing experts from China, the US, and the UK are planning yet another blue ribbon committee to bring it all under control. Now understand, there is no control when it comes to this. The minute you step over that line, there will be corruption, there will be lies, there will be unethical things being done. You can't control something like this. The genie is out of the bottle. Unless you make it illegal to begin with, it's just going to end up bad. Now, here we see the truth. I'll put a link to this. What the heck is going on here? That's a long article, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. We're going to get into some other stuff, but understand that Epstein was funding this guy's research. They had discussions about hiding the identities of cloned children from the public. This is all very real. And yet, the Department of Justice says, oh, there's nothing to see here. No additional arrests. Now, they're not going to get away with this. They think they are, but they're not. And there is the silent majority of Americans who have zero faith in our government. Even the people that are trying to stand their ground and pretend like there's nothing to see here. Inside, their conscience is being seared. They're seeing the truth for what it is. And this will manifest in many different ways. People will first try to hold on to what they believe is safe and what they believe that they've built. They think they are weatherproofed against what's coming. They think they have their gold and their Bitcoin and their 401k. And they're just happy that their 401k is doing well right now. But when all that comes crashing down and all their money is stolen, and the power of the dollar is weaker and weaker, and they go to retire and they realize the money they thought that they had saved that was going to be enough is not even going to be close, that's when we're going to see outrage. And as the police state and the artificial intelligence surveillance state strangleholds people's freedoms, and the policing is focused on the average citizen instead of the rich billionaires who get away with whatever they want, that's when things will finally begin to explode. Wow. Now let's get into some of these other Epstein files because I decided to look into Bohemian Grove. I don't know if anyone had done that yet. So I did a search on Bohemian Grove and guess what I found? A peculiar email between Jeffrey Epstein and this guy, Moritz Skagen. And for some reason, Moritz Skagen thought it was important to tell Epstein that he was going to Bohemian Grove. This is creepy. So first, Epstein emails this guy, says Karam is Karam Wade, a very good friend, knows Africa well, son of the former president of Senegal. And he, Karam, was Minister of Energy and is looked up to by many of the continent's leaders. Moritz then replies, great work, or great, will do and keep you posted. Greetings from Singapore. On my way to California and to try to understand about the people at the Bohemian Grove. Now, who is this guy, Moritz Skagen? Well, this is Moritz Skagen Jr., and this has to be him because his dad passed away in 2005, and the email was dated 2012. Who is Moritz Skagen Jr.? He's a Norwegian ship owner. So no doubt he's probably in touch with Met, the Norwegian princess. Got a lot of Norwegians in the Epstein files, don't we? A Norwegian ship owner. Now, the shipping industry in Norway is huge. It's at the top of their gross domestic product. They fish and ships is what they're into. So this is crazy. Now, this guy was born on Saturnalia. Yes, December 17th is the festival of Saturnalia. And I'm sure he went over to Bohemian Grove to pay his respects to Molech. Do not sacrifice your children to Molech in the fire. You know, it's interesting because the word Molech has the word molest in it, doesn't it? Has to be a connection there about the children. Unbelievable. Now, that was the only email I could find to understand that, you know, they want us to believe that all the files have been released, but yet you find these remnants. I call them remnants because you should be able to double down, maybe do a search on that guy's name and see all the whole context of that conversation in other emails, but all that's been erased. So we find these remnants, bits and pieces. And this is how you know the files have been scrubbed, because you only find little remnants. You can never get the full story. Now, what else is going on? Well, I found this email between Ken Starr. Remember Ken Starr? And Jeffrey Epstein. And in the email chain, Epstein is mocking the gospel. What are they talking about? Well, let's get into this email here. Let's read this. Start from the bottom. This is Epstein wrote, "Great seeing you. I'm having trouble distinguishing between your Baker case and Jesus. Having to accept Christ seems to me, in your words, forced speech. Laying out behaviors to follow. Seems legit. Forcing acknowledgement of a belief. Seems like tell the baker not only should he make the cake, but he should say, I believe? ? Now, Ken Starr then replies, great point. At a basic level, the acceptance of Christ must be voluntary. It's an invitation. No forced acknowledgments, conversions, etc. is as in the bad old days. Rather, the invitation is extended warmly and lovingly. This is what Ken Starr said. Then Epstein quotes the Bible. He says, Romans 10:13, for whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And, quote, say, Father in heaven, I believe that Jesus died for my sins, and God will impart eternal life to your spirit. And then Epstein says, sounds like forced speech to me. So he's literally mocking the gospel. Ken Starr then replies. He says, again, fair point, but as Billy Graham want to say, gosh, their grammar is horrific. I don't pretend to know the mind of God. So the great preacher, for one, would not agree with the proposition of unhappy consequences automatically flowing to those who do not believe. Epstein then replies, as usual, very clever, he was great. However, the double negative of not bad to those that don't is not the same as only good to those that do. When you are in New York, next we should sit with Bannon. I told him he can learn a lot from you. And as you are probably already aware, he doesn't miss a Sunday in church. Whoa. Now the way he's speaking here is almost as if Epstein was there at the crucifixion. He was great. However, the double negative of not bad to those that don't is not the same as only good to those that do. You know, the Bible says even the demons believe in God and the Son of Man. They just refuse to worship him. Pretty cryptic email, isn't it? With Ken Starr and all this. Now, let's go back in the chat here. What are your guys' thoughts on all this? Now, here's the update on the Epstein files over the last 24 hours. Pam Bondi has come forward and is saying all the files have been released, but no more wrongdoing has been identified. And here's what really happened. They gave us a sanitized version of the files so we can all just move along. They probably was some kind of backroom deal between the Democrats and the Republicans. They all got together and decided the best way to spare them all jail time was to put out a sanitized version of the files where they spread all the liability across evenly, and they have some embarrassing emails, but then there's nothing criminal. Nobody's implicated. And so essentially, we got a snow job, didn't we? They threw out all this information, irrelevant information in the files, and names, but no teeth. They literally flooded the files with all these irrelevant news stories to make it nearly impossible to wade through the files. This gave them time to cover and sanitize the files. Now, if you don't believe this, the proof is that they didn't even bother to release any, not one, of the hundreds of images of Trump and Epstein together. Don't you think that those would be in the files? Even though the images, they were literally doing nothing wrong, those should have been in the files, right? Now, we know they exist because we see them in Getty Images, and people have collected them over the years. There are literally hundreds of pictures with Trump and Epstein. And it should have been in the files. But even they were removed to protect Trump's reputation. We can't find one benign communication in the files between the two men. There's no party invitations, no coordination of events, no birthday invites, no trip planning, no Mar-a-Lago event notices, nothing. If you were reading the files, you would think that there was no connection between these two men at all. And I'm not talking just about things that they're implicated in. I'm talking just a basic friendship. There's zero. If you were just to go by what the files say. Now, the only glimpse that we had in the files that they knew each other were the pictures in Epstein's personal drawer between Trump and Epstein. And of course, they quickly removed those from the site. The only other thing we have are the accusations against Trump by victims, which included Epstein's name in the accusations. And if you use your critical thinking brain, you would understand that some of these older accusations that tie these two men together, some of them go back to the 90s, that it was random. And it was so random that it had to be true. Because at that point in history, when the accusations were made, Trump was not president yet. He didn't even have a TV show yet. So to put these two men together in an accusation means something against the backdrop of the modern context, right? Think about it. The Apprentice TV show hadn't even launched yet in the 90s. Now, if I had to give you a metaphor to prove Trump's involvement, think about this. Imagine someone made an accusation against Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart, and they said, yeah, they drugged me and they drugged me into a thing and then molested me. But then you found out, this was before Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg ever did a cooking show together. You would just never put those two together in the same room, right? So what I'm trying to say here is the implication only becomes clear in hindsight. When you look back in time, you say, wow, this victim from the 1990s said Trump and Epstein were in the same room. You don't understand the implication unless you see it from hindsight. So, crazy, right? So that's what I had for you guys today. Bohemian Grove, designer babies with no identification. Jeez, when is this going to end? So understand the files have been sanitized. It's apparent to 99% of anybody with a thinking brain who takes 1 minute to consider everything that's happened, the delay of the files, the lies at first. Here's what I think happened. I think at first, when Trump wanted to get elected, they had no idea what was really in the files, because otherwise he would have never promised to release the files, right? He was shooting from the hip. Somebody probably tried to check him, but he must have known. He must have known he was going to be in the Epstein files, right? I mean, think about it. He must have known. Why would he promise to do something like that? But Trump's made a lot of promises that he's not meeting, right? But this one in particular touches him personally. He promised to lock Hillary up. He had no plan of ever locking Hillary up, did he? So he lied straight to our face. We know that now. He was sympathetic to Ghislaine Maxwell, got her a sweetheart deal, even though the files show that she was a monster. It's almost as if these people don't understand that molesting a child is evil. And that's the dead giveaway. When they treat the molesters better than they do the victims, that means that they're evil. Trump hasn't even acknowledged the victims. He hasn't said one kind word about the victims. Nothing. Here's what he should have said. And if I was Trump's PR agent, this is what I would have told him to say. I would have said, okay, here's what you say. I knew that Epstein guy was a creep. And you know what? I feel really bad for the victims out there. It must have been horrible what you went through. I'm so sorry you went through that. In fact, we're going to pass some legislation. I'm going to sign an executive order to basically go after human trafficking. And we're going to name it the Victims of Epstein Human Trafficking Executive Order in your honor. And we are going to continue to investigate what happened to you and hopefully bring some people to to be prosecuted. Had he said that, I think more people would have believed him, right? But instead, it's absolutely crickets. It's almost as if he doesn't want to give any acknowledgement of what happened, because eventually all of this is going to come out. You got to use your brain when thinking about this stuff. Don't buy the slop that they feed you to brainwash you. Think about it, how a normal person would handle this situation. Even if they were guilty, they would have handled it completely differently, right? They would have handled it completely differently. So, where do we go from here? Well, people are like, well, what do? We can't do anything. Well, I've been telling everybody what to do from the beginning. Okay? For the last 10 years. And I've tried to live the example that I'm trying to tell you to do. You can't continue to feed this beast. What are you talking about, Casey? We live in the beast. Yes, you do. But there are things you can do to empower the beast and make them rich. There's things you can do to not empower the beast and to starve the beast. Okay? How does the beast make money off of us? Well, they make money off of us through consumerism. They make money off of us through coming out with new versions of things, new iPhones, new this, new that. And we all know that unless we have the relevance to get to the people who are feeding the beast, then we're never going to be able to starve the beast, right? This is why the relevance was so important, to reach people, to show them the lie so that they too can try to starve the beast. How do you starve the beast? Well, how long has it been since we've realized ticket prices to go anywhere to do anything is through the roof? Disneyland. All those Christians that show up to Disneyland because they want to give their kids some kind of experience, that's one quick way to starve the beast. Never take your kids to Disneyland again. It's overpriced anyways. You're essentially soft grooming your children because there's furries running around in uniforms that are anonymous. The only thing missing from the equation is they're not drugging your children and dragging them off into some underground tunnel. I'm sure some of that's probably happening. I've also told you guys not to invest in the beast anymore. Oh, well, Casey, how are we going to retire? Well, retirement is a concept of independence financially. So instead of putting all your money in some magic account, just because the beast is telling you, oh, put your money in here, it's going to grow 10% a year, it's going to double and triple. How do you know it's going to do that? Yeah, historically it's been doing that, but you could lose everything. And by the time you cash out your 401k and your IRAs, you're going to pay more taxes on that anyway. Right? As the dollar weakens, it's not even worth the same as what you put in. True retirement is financial independence. Without a bunch of money stored up, it's about resources. It's about settling debts. It's about basically having the least amount of monthly expenditures as possible. That's true retirement and true financial freedom. But yet, we've been brainwashed. And what do they do with our 401k money? They make money off of that. They invest our money. I heard some statistic that it was like times 20 or times 10. In other words, you put your money into a bank or 401k and they borrow 10 times that amount. And they make billions and trillions. This is what Epstein was doing. This was how he made his money off of our money, because we keep feeding the beast. How else do you starve the beast? Well, you get rid of the frills in life. You simplify your life. Concerts, do more free stuff, do more local stuff. It's not that you have to lead a boring life. Do things that you're not feeding the beast. Don't celebrate their holidays. You guys, holidays are the number one way that they make money off of us. Why? Because it's an emotional investment, right? There is emotions, obligation. You're spending money that you really don't have, but hey, it's Halloween. Hey, it's Christmas. Hey, it's Valentine's Day. Hey, it's this. Hey, it's that. It's a mindset. You're in this world, but not of it. The beast only gets his power from our energy, our labor. There's a million things you can do, but it starts with you. It starts with me. It starts with relevance. It starts with not being afraid to speak boldly about channels like this to your family and friends. Now's the time, because it's all been revealed in the Epstein files. To speak boldly. You guys, we do have some feathers in our cap. We were right about the pandemic. We were right about the vaccine. You can be bold about that now. Who cares if your family tells you to flip off? We were right, and you know it. So the time of fear is over. And until those people understand that we are the ones feeding the beast, and all these people who are doing these things to our children and running secret experiments and running pandemics, that was in the Epstein files. Epstein and Bill Gates laid out the pandemic before it happened, even before the other one. What was it? There's coronavirus, and then, gosh, it's hard to keep all this stuff straight in my brain. You guys know what I'm talking about. The other pandemic, the smaller one, that was the precursor, and then coronavirus. So there's a million things you can do, but very few people want to do it because they love the beast. They love going to football games and paying $400 a ticket. They love going to a movie and paying $25 for a ticket to go to a movie because of the experience. They love concerts. The very people who are singing about Satan and all these things, right? They love all this stuff. They love going and doing all these things that feed the beast. They love their 30-year mortgage because they can get more house than they could have saved for. They love borrowing money. They love holidays because it's a time for family to get together. Yeah, that's what they tell us, but really, you're spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands of dollars per holiday to feed the beast. This is when the beast makes all their money during the Christmas sales. Halloween, by the way, has almost surpassed Christmas in spending, if you hadn't figured that out. What kind of clue is that about the evil of America? So I'm doing it. I can't make you do it, but I can explain to you why all of this happened, because we were all asleep as Christians. We kept feeding the beast. It goes far beyond just upsetting God with pagan holidays. Do you see now how it's not just about that? It doesn't matter your intention. It doesn't matter your intention about why you celebrate a holiday. You can tell yourself, oh, I don't celebrate the holiday because that's not my intention. I don't do the pagan part of it. My intention is fellowship and all this stuff. But essentially, at the end of the day, you're feeding the beast. You're paying into their profits. Okay, I'm going to give you a personal example. Every once in a while, I'll get a sweet tooth. Now, this is kind of a funny story, and it's me being vulnerable. Now, I don't often do this, but every once in a while, it's really easy. Now, we have Amazon. I understand that's part of feeding the beast as well, but it's about what you buy and when you buy it, and it's about the amount of money that you spend, right? And for what things. There are things that are essential. So I don't really have a problem, ordering things on Amazon. Okay. As long as you're not going crazy and, feeding the beast. You can starve the beast even if you're buying things on Amazon, right? Because here's the thing. I can get in my car and go to the store, and guess what? It's going to cost me the same amount of money and fuel to get to the store, right? By the time it's all said and done, they've made it so that it's easier just to order it online. Okay, but it's what you buy. If you're going crazy buying things you don't need, that's feeding the beast. If you're being practical, you're thinking about things you need for the future, things that you might not be able to get tomorrow because, of shortage and things like that, then it's different. But anyway, long story short, every once in a while I'll get a sweet tooth. So for some reason, and here's the bizarre thing. Valentine's Day just passed, right? We are so programmed that when that time of year comes around, even though I have not celebrated Valentine's in 25 years, I'm so programmed that I actually get a sweet tooth around Valentine's Day. Does that happen to you guys? Let's do a poll here. And then I'll tell you the rest of the story. Do you subliminally get a sweet tooth during Valentine's Day? That's a good one. So, ready for this? So I'm like, man, I need some chocolate. Man, I need some red vines. So I go on to Amazon because I'm like, I'm gonna buy it bulk, right? Did you know? So I have this extension in my browser, and it will tell you the price history of anything, right? So that you know when to buy it. Because yes, they have what's called dynamic pricing. They up the price during certain times of the year and they lower it in other times of the year. Now, this is going to make you angry because essentially what they've done is they've corralled us into buying habits to where they can maximize their profits. In other words, these sneaky bastards, excuse my French, have created a system where they further pillage us. So I plug in this browser and I look at the price history of red vines. Right before Valentine's Day, the price almost doubles. It's the same with chocolate. Right before Valentine's Day, the price of chocolate, it doesn't matter what chocolate, it could be a Mars bar. It could be Three Musketeers. It could be a Snickers. They literally double the price of the chocolate and candy just to sock it to you. Now, some idiots, I used to be one of those idiots. When I was in college, I made this big, beautiful, I'll tell you another personal story. Big, beautiful Valentine's card for my who would end up being the mother of my children, right? It was this massive Valentine's card. We went to the hobby store and we got these pieces of wood and we we painted them pink and glued them on the board. Me and my friend did this. He did it for his girlfriend and I did it for my girlfriend. And then I made we had these huge board to where you open it up and there was like a pop-up. So there was like a pop-up, right? And then I took the time and I made these sweet, kind words with poems of love. Okay. Gave this to Max's mom. She's going to kill me if she hears this story, but hey, took the card, looked all happy. Next year, I was like, hey, where'd that Valentine's card go that I gave you from last year that I spent freaking 2 days on? Oh, I had to throw it. I just threw it away. Okay, that's the last Valentine's card you get. So there are idiots out there. I used to be one of those idiots who go out and they feel obligated and they'll spend 2 to 3 times as much as what candy should cost to fulfill an obligation to the beast. You're really giving it to the beast. You're not giving it to the person who really doesn't give a crap about it. They might for a while, but then the thought is gone and we've fed the beast. Now the same goes true for all your flights. If you fly during these times of year where we've been corralled into spending habits and vacations, you're going to pay twice as much to fly on Christmas than to fly on Thanksgiving and to fly on all the other dumb holidays. Okay? So it's up to us to starve the beast. And that's just the truth. Now, if you want to, you can do whatever you want. I'm not going to think about you any kind of way. I'm not going to be mad at you if you don't. But people keep begging me and asking me for an answer, and I keep giving it to them. But then they don't want to do what it takes, right? They don't want to do what it takes. So what can I do? All I can do is keep trying and keep giving you examples of how these people lie to our faces. They don't do what we ask them to do. Food prices never come down. They just keep going up. They grape and pillage us on all of the days that they've selected that we just go along with because of the marketing. Then they steal our children. So when are we going to do something about that? When are we going to starve the beast? Now, the Bible says, who can make war with the beast? Well, but it doesn't mean we're not supposed to try. Doesn't mean we're not supposed to try, right? So a little bit of tough talk, some things to think about. Again, I'm not going to be mad at you that you don't do what I'm telling you to do, but it is what it is. Yes, Lupercalia is Valentine's Day, and it's horrifying. Someone asked me the other day, why do they have pink on Valentine's Day? What is pink adrenochrome about? You ready? During Lupercalia, and by the way, the last day of Lupercalia was yesterday, they would sacrifice a dog and a goat. They would slit their throats and let the blood pour out into a bucket of milk. And the blood mixed with the milk would turn pink. Full fear factor. They had the full fear of the animal. That's the adrenochrome. Then they would cut pieces of skin. They would flay the skin off of these beasts that they had just sacrificed. And they would wear it. And that's where you get the thong. They actually called it a thong. It's a piece of a skin of an animal. They would wear it and they would beat each other with it. That's where you get into S&M and all this stuff. And they would chase each other in this fertility ritual around Rome. Remember they made thongs popular? That's where it came from. I bet you if we looked up the origins of a thong, it might have released on Valentine's Day. So we keep repeating these rituals over and over again, and people wonder why their life's in chaos. They wonder why God isn't answering their prayers. We can't even climb off of the holidays. That's just basic 101. So that's the truth about Lupercalia. Now, every once in a while, these elite will sacrifice their own. Remember Justice Scalia? Well, they killed him on Lupercalia. His name is literally in the date that he died, if you can believe that. So, wow, right? All right. Yep, it's always been about the children. From the very beginning of time, God told the Israelites, do not sacrifice your children to Molech in the fire. Why would he have to tell them that? Because the Canaanites were doing that, and God didn't want them to pick up the habits of the Canaanites. Now, there were only a few times in the Bible, in the Gospel, in the New Testament, where Jesus gave stern warning. There are some abominations listed. There's also the warning against those who harm the children. It's the one of the few examples that Jesus gives about harsh consequences or some kind of pain that the people who harm the children would have to deal with. And that was a millstone around the neck. And it suggests that there wouldn't just be fire and incineration for evil and death and instant death. No, they don't get off that easy. They get a little bit of torture. They get a millstone around their neck. So, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? So, here we are in America, and all the files have been released, and it shows that all of these people were creepy, and they were all hanging out with Epstein after he was convicted. And still, in America, there's no outrage. Well, there was no crime committed. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If we can't show a crime, we know the crimes are committed, but they've scrubbed the files. The very fact that they were hanging out with him after he was convicted tells you everything you need to know. The fact that probably most of these people in our government have already seen the files and they're still defending it and saying there were no crimes tells you everything you need to know. Do you also notice a common voice coming out of the Epstein files from Congress, which also suggests some kind of cover-up? The common voice I'm talking about, it's kind of latent, it's kind of silent, but they're all saying in the news and media, but we have to say that Trump was not accused of any wrongdoing, right? They keep saying that. All of them say it, even the people that are pretending to talk against Trump. Oh, but we have to say that Trump was not convicted of any wrongdoing or accused of any wrongdoing, and that's simply incorrect. He was accused of wrongdoing. There were official complaints and reports against him. So that's a lie. It's a straight up lie. Now, he wasn't convicted of anything, but there were payouts. Why aren't we seeing those payouts that Trump paid and settled out of court? Why don't we get to see those? Why aren't those in the Epstein files? We know it happened. So, don't think this Epstein thing was a big nothing sandwich, because what I just showed you today and what we just talked about suggests otherwise. And that's what's going on with this. All right, let's see how many people. Okay, so about 40% of you have had a sweet tooth around the time of Valentine's Day subliminally. It's about what I would expect. Okay, what else is going on, you guys? Waste of taxpayer money, all these hearings. All they do is fight with each other, says Bonnie. Well, I will say that they are a waste of time because it's a kangaroo court. It's them just pretending. What was it? That Jim Johnson guy or whatever? Well, he's one of the accused. Pretending to lead out, pretending to be tough on Pam Bondi and all this. He was named by Sasha Riley. He was named as one of the most evil in this ring. And then he would beat Sasha within an inch of his life. That's the accusation. Why isn't anyone talking about that? So there are some pretenders in all this. I believe there are some real people in Congress trying to do something, but then there are pretenders as well. Heck, I heard Nancy Mace say, oh yeah, one thing in her own words, she says Trump was exonerated by the files. How can she say that? He's absolutely not exonerated by the files. There are several accusations against him in the files. How could she say he's exonerated? We also know that Trump's name was one of the names that was redacted in the version that we got. They took Trump's name out of it. So how can she say he's exonerated in the files? So you have to wonder, why would she say that? Even though she's pretending to be an advocate for the victims and she's going to bring people to justice, it's just hard to know who to believe anymore, isn't it? Why is only Congress able to see the unredacted names? We don't need to see all the bad stuff. We don't need to see the victims, but we need all the other names unredacted in these emails where the name shouldn't be redacted, right? Why aren't we getting to see that? So it's just another kangaroo court. So there's a lot going on, you guys, but hopefully we've made some sense of it today so you can understand. So Harkin says Nancy is mentally unwell now. She seems like she's pretty put together to me. Very articulate. Unless there's some kind of history, I don't know. What does concern me is that she's saying that Trump's been exonerated by the files. That does concern me. But everything else she's saying sounds like she's advocating for the victims. She even addressed why her name showed up in the files. There was a victim that accused her in the files of having fake sex with her. So, and in that accusation, she also names Ron DeSantis as an abuser. So I don't know. But USA has thousands of biolabs. That's what we should be worried about, yes. But as I said earlier, the reason why they like the offshore biolabs is because they can get away with whatever they want. There's no regulation. And there's so much corruption, they can do whatever they want. That's why. In fact, Ukraine was known as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. So, of course, there's biolabs here. Now, one thing I did notice in the Epstein files, and this is just a general theme, is that there seems to be some sense of order. In other words, they couldn't just get away with whatever they wanted to get away with. There were some rules and some order, but then there were loopholes and ways to get around things. And there was infighting and there was, sacrifice. They would sacrifice each other at times when people would step out of line or get caught. So there was some of that. It wasn't just a free for all. So, okay. Yeah, they even faked Ghislaine on the screen to plead the fifth. Yes, that was definitely a fake Ghislaine Maxwell. Completely different noses. Christy says, I think Pam Bondi is a victim turned. Yeah, I believe so as well. Remember, she was the attorney general in Florida when all of this was going on. Of course, she was involved and of course, she knew about it. She at least got memos from this, one of the largest pedophile rings at the time, happening in her own state. She must have been briefed on this on some level, right? We can't imagine. I mean, that would make her a poor attorney general if she didn't know that there was a millionaire, multi-millionaire, billionaire in her own state doing these things, right? Even if she wasn't handling the case directly. So these people are not telling us the truth. Yes, they're gaslighting us. Straight up. So, yep. And then they've coined these words, these trigger words, right? That people automatically go to when they want to try to disarm your argument. Trump derangement syndrome. You must have. Why are you so obsessed with Trump? That's weird. Are you a Democrat? Right? And in their mind, that makes them feel better. And then what I said, let's talk about the points. This has nothing to do with who I like or don't like. Let's talk about the points. Oh, well, I talk to people all the time and they're like, oh, Well, I don't care about any of that. Well, there's nothing that proves Trump did anything. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the lying straight to our faces that it was a Democrat hoax, that he didn't hardly even know him. And then it just went on, one lie, one lie, one lie. But before it's all said and done, you can't even remember all the lies because they just kept passing the buck, throwing the hot potato. And by the end of it, it was a snow job. People don't even know what they're saying. The lies alone prove that they're all guilty. Remember Pam Bondi says, oh, there's so much evidence here that there's so many horrific videos. It would change the course of the country. Yes, she said that. Where is all that stuff? Right? They got rid of it. So, yes, Trump wants everything named after him. That's Trump derangement syndrome. I agree 100%. That's weird. That's narcissistic. Heck, I won't even put my name on a t-shirt anymore. Because why? Because I just feel weird. I feel like it draws attention to me. Yeah, I know it brings people to the channel, but I used to do that and I'm like, yeah, that's a little bit weird. That's a little bit culty. I don't want people, walking around with my name on their t-shirt, I mean, I love you guys, but it's a little bit culty, right? But yet you've got a man who's got self-portraits of himself, full body self-portraits of himself all over his house. He's constantly looking in the mirror. He puts T on every single thing. It's all about Trump, Trump, Trump. He can't even make a company name outside of his own name because he's so obsessed with it. Right? Now, some of you have been talking about the man of lawlessness. And, I wasn't so sure before, but now I'm starting to wonder. I mean, this is lawlessness right in our faces. And everybody is lawless with Trump. It's like he has a mind chip in all these people that work for him. He literally, and I'm wondering, maybe he hired Bondi because she was already implicated. Maybe they got pictures of her with Epstein. Right? Who knows? Because how else would he be able to control her so completely like this to where she's not going to go after any additional people? He must have hired her because he had dirt on her. He's like, uh-oh, the Epstein files. Who are we going to put in the DOJ so we can control this outcome? Well, Bondi. Do you think it's an accident that she was the Florida Attorney General under which all this happened? No, I think the two are connected. I think he put her in because he knew he could control her. And he probably said, okay, this is what I need you to do. I got this picture of you and Epstein on that night on the island with Klein and Nicki Minaj. And, what I need you to do is go through and take out all references to my name. All of them. And she did it. And then when the one in the drawer, Epstein picture, Trump's picture in the drawer, she got probably backslapped for that one because that one got through. And he's like, I told you. And then they pull it off the website. Why would they pull that off the website? Yeah. And then he appointed Acosta. Same thing. Thank you. Trump has surrounded himself with all the people from the Epstein era. It's literally obvious to anyone paying attention. Anyone who's not mind controlled will see this. There's a dozen people that were directly involved in the Epstein case who were emailing Epstein before, during, and after his conviction that are in Trump's cabinet right now. It's like he went in the laundry list and said, okay, let's hire all these people. Yes, Satan is real. And Jesus Christ is real too. All right. I went off on a little tangent there. When I go off on a tangent, my voice gets all high pitched and I sound like I'm whining. So I apologize. But I'm just I get emotionally involved in this because there are so many sleep people, right? All right. Blondie. That's a good one. But Pam Blondie. I call her Bombity because she keeps bombing out. It's really the Trump files. Yes. Blackmailing the blackmailers. Yes. Reverse blackmailism. Yeah, I think so too. I think there were people in the DOJ that were trying to leak bits of truth. I agree with that 100%. They left little breadcrumbs. They probably have all been fired or killed or whatever happens to people. I can't imagine, because think about it. Trump only has dirt on so many people. So if they're saying there were 500 attorneys working on the files, then I have to believe that at least 5% of those attorneys wanted to do the right thing. But they were probably quickly found out and their career was ended. So there were probably some casualties of war with this because Trump didn't have dirt on them. All he can do is fire them, right? So, drain the swamp. He filled the swamp with sharks. Yes. Jim Morrison said these people are vampires. Kazarian Mafia. Bondi mass event that happened on the beach. Weird too. No honor among thieves. Jesus is King, Lord of Lords. Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to pop off of here. Thanks, everybody, for showing up. Wonderful discussion. Probably be back between the headlines tomorrow, or we could do Copper Kings number 10. So one of those two scenarios, depending on what's in the news. I love each and every one of you. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Much love.